Okay, we are starting our session and starting the recording. So, hi again, everybody. Hope you had a fantastic Labor Day weekend. And just wanted to start by kind of going through some of the things that I know we had questions on and we're seeing from chapters 1 and 2. So I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that you guys understand what I'm expecting for homework to be turned in. So make sure some of the biggest problems that I saw with homework were people just not submitting them in one Excel sheet. So what I mean by that, and I want to go over it again because I got a lot of Excel sheets that some people use the course documents help and stuff like that, and others did not. Some put things in Word, which, again, I can't accept anything unless it's in Excel. Okay, so let me just open up an Excel sheet and, again, kind of show you what I'm expecting because I got a lot of submissions that were not in the format that I asked for. Okay, so I just want to make sure everybody's clear with this because this week, if you don't turn it in the way I've asked for it, I'm going to have you redo it. Okay, and I will deduct points for that. Can you guys hear me okay? Kevin, can you type in and let me know if you can hear anything? It shows that my microphone's working, but Jennifer's saying she can't hear anything. Okay, so Kevin says that he can hear me. Hang on just a minute. Okay, so can you check your speakers, Jennifer? Make sure that they're not muted. Okay. All right, so getting back to the Excel document that I'm looking for, okay? Good example of what I'm looking for looks basically like, let's just do this. Let's see if this will work. All right. Give me a minute. Okay. So taking a look at, for instance, the homework, this is kind of what you should have started out with in putting it down in one sheet. Okay, so everything should go in one sheet, right? It shouldn't be multiple sheets across the page like this with a different problem on every sheet. That is not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for this because this is easy to grade, it's easy to give feedback on, etc. Okay? So please, please, please make sure that you are doing it this way. Put one problem, then the next problem, then the next problem. Okay? Hopefully that's very clear. Again, if I don't get it in this format this time, I'm going to deduct points and I'm also going to have you redo it. Okay? It's very important that we get this right going forward because you will have a final that has to be graded, and I want to be able to give you good feedback on that. Okay? All right, so with that said, let's move on. Another thing that you also need to make sure you're doing is checking the syllabus for the problems that you're supposed to do. Um, I got a lot of people that literally didn't do an entire chapter. So need you to make sure that you've checked and made sure you've covered all of the problems. Do not wait until Thursday night to start these problems. That is a very bad strategy because I promise you, most of the chapters get harder, much harder, and these problems will get much longer. Okay, so you need to start them on Monday. That's the reason why I have the webinars on Tuesday. Okay, so that when you start them on Monday, read through everything, look over the problems. You still have time to form your questions, right? After you've watched that initial webinar. Okay, so you definitely need to be starting on these early in the week and making sure you get them finished as soon as possible. Okay, don't wait on life to happen because it will. And, there'll be something come up Thursday night, power goes out, Blackboard goes down, something like that. Okay, it's your responsibility to make sure you get those problems in on time. Okay, and by the due date. All right. So let's just make sure that we agree to that. And going forward, I know that we'll have, fantastic turnout. So, all right, moving on. What questions do you guys have for chapter 3 or chapters 1 and 2? Take your pick. Any questions? Okay. So, one question we have is on debits and credits, and this is an excellent question. I know this is one of the most confusing parts for many of my accounting students. Okay, so assets. Somebody said that struggling with the idea that an asset is a debit. Okay, so I know a lot of people are used to getting their bank statements, right? And you're used to looking at that and seeing how the debits and credits when you think of a bank statement work. The problem is with that, you have to think about it as to who is presenting it to who. Okay, so the bank is actually presenting it to you. So to them, the direction of the entry is correct. Okay, but to you, technically, according to accounting, the direction of entry is incorrect. Okay, so here's the thing. Let's take a look at. I'm going to show you this course document, debits and credits cheat sheet. Just a second. All right. So while this may sound counterintuitive, right, debit means left, right, and credit means right, okay? So the types of accounts, and think of, a chart of accounts. So you probably read about that, or you should have by now. The chart of accounts will deal with the type of account. So whether it's a dividend or a draw, that's another word for it. Whether it's an expense, an asset, or a loss. Okay? Those types of accounts are increased, right? So say we go from 0 to 100, increased, right? That's a debit. So in order to increase those accounts, you have to debit them. Okay? one thing that I found kind of helpful with this is you might think of deal when we're calling accounts that are increased. So dividends, expenses, assets, losses, right? So that's one thing to kind of help you remember those, okay? Generally, the types of accounts that are increased with a credit are gains, income, revenues, liabilities, and stockholders' equity, okay? So think of girls when you're recalling that, okay? So to increase your income, you're going to credit it, okay? Oh, sorry. Good call. There you go. Can you see my screen, Kevin? Okay. All right, cool. So can you see these? See these? Here's again accounts that are increased with a debit, deals, dividends, expenses, assets, losses, right? And credits that when you increase with a credit are gains, income, revenues, liabilities, and stockholders' equity. Okay? So just keeping this in mind, think of a journal entry. Okay, so you should have read about your journal entries, correct? In making out, like, say, your general journal. Okay, your adjusting entries. So, for instance, okay, let's talk about a depreciation expense. Okay, so think of that word, expense. How are we going to increase it? If you have a depreciation expense, what are you going to do? Debit or credit? Anybody know? Debit. Very good. You're going to debit it because an expense, remember, if you have an expense that comes on the income statement, remember, you're going to have a debit. Okay? Now, what does that mean for the balance sheet entry? And what would your balance sheet account be if you had a depreciation expense? So whatever you do on the income statement, you have to do the exact opposite on the balance sheet. So what are you going to do on the balance sheet? What's your entry? Anyone know? Credit. Very good. You're going to credit the accumulated depreciation account. Okay? So you'll credit the accumulated depreciation account for the same amount. And this is actually in problem 3-3B. This is actually A on that. Okay? So let's try another expense. What if you had supplies expense that increased? What would you do? You guys know? If you had a supplies expense, think about that last word, expense. Anybody know? Debit. Very good, Kevin. Okay. And then what would you do for the balance sheet side? The opposite, yes, you would credit it. Okay. So let's just take a look at, let me pull up the blank sheet here. Okay, so we've got our expenses, right? We're going to let's say we have an expense of office supplies. Okay, so in August we bought $500 of office supplies, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to put income statement, or let's do this. Let's set this up. So our description and if I can spell that right, fantastic. There we go. And then we're going to do our debit and our credit. Okay? So our description is basically the description of the account that we're trying to hit with this entry. Okay? So in August we purchased $500 of office supplies. So our description is going to be office supplies expense. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. So what are we going to do here? Are we going to debit or credit? Debit. Good. So we're going to debit $500 of office supplies expense, right? This is on which financial statement? Income statement or balance sheet? Income statement. Good. So this one hits the income statement. Okay. Then we have to hit the balance sheet. What are we going to do to that? What's our offset to that? Any idea? How about supplies? Right? And we're going to do what? Just the opposite, right? Under credit. This is what hits the balance sheet. Okay? So does that kind of make more sense if we look at it from a perspective of you're always going to have one side hitting your income statement, you're always going to have another side hitting your balance sheet. Okay? If it's an expense, we want it to increase and we're going to debit it. If it's the offset to that, we would credit that. So basically what happens is these two cancel each other out. So you have a zero effect. Okay? So keep that in mind. You can never, ever, ever have an entry that is lopsided. Meaning, I can't put 250 over here and have it equal out. I would have to have 250. So like if we paid cash for this, if we paid 250 cash and then we put 250 on credit, we would credit another 250 over here on the income statement. This has to equal whatever we put over here. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so journal entries always, always, always have to equal zero. Another thing that I will tell you, and I promise you this is going to happen, okay? you're going to get in and just start doing a balance sheet, and you're going to see that your balance sheet doesn't equal. Okay? So, for instance, let's see. Let's just say we have a balance sheet that has these entries in them. Okay? Do you see how both sides of those equal the 116,500? Okay. They always, 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 always have to equal. If you've got one side that doesn't equal the other, your balance sheet is wrong. Okay? It means that you don't have all of the entries on this side or all of the entries on this side. Assets, liabilities, and stockholders' equity have to equal. Okay? So this would be like the asset side, and this would be liabilities plus stockholders' equity. Okay? They always have to equal. That's why it's called a balance sheet. It balances. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Cool. All right. What other questions do you have? Okay. Jennifer, does that make more sense now? What about revenue? Do you understand the revenue side? Because that's just a little bit different. Let's take a look at it, because I know I spent a lot of time on expenses. Let's take a look at revenue. So generally, these types of accounts are increased with credit. So revenue / sales, whatever you want to call it, is increased with a credit. Okay? So basically, what happens is on the income statement, you're going to have the income statement journal entry. Let's say revenue / sales. And the reason I say / sales, you will see there will be different problems throughout these chapters that one will call it revenue, another one will call it sales. You're going to see a lot of different terminology in the chapters. Do not get hung up on the word, okay? That's one of the biggest keys that a lot of people wind up having a problem with, is that they get hung up on the words that these accounts are called. Okay, sales is the same thing as revenue. It's just a different word. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're reading this. You have to think, where am I supposed to put this? Revenue and sales goes on the income statement, right? Now, what's the offset to revenue and sales? There's two. Any idea? What's on the balance sheet side of revenue and sales? Where do you put this? Think about your customers. How do they pay you? Are they paying you with cash? Exactly. Good, Kevin. Cash or AR? Perfect. Yep. Great. Good job, guys. So the revenue side is where your customers either pay cash for their products or they put it on account, what we call putting something on account, meaning you've given them credit you're going to let them pay in 30 days from now, in 15 days from now, in 10 days from now, whatever the case may be. So cash or accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is just a fancy way of saying it's money that's owed to you, right? So if you make a sale and that sale hasn't been paid for by cash, then it's accounts receivable. Okay? Same thing goes with expenses. Either you pay cash for expenses, right? So it comes directly out of your checking account. Okay? So either you pay cash or you put it to accounts payable because somebody gave you credit to put it on account, saying that you could pay it 10, 15, 30 days from now. Okay? So these two are the biggest two offsets that you have to worry about. Okay? And there's a lot of subsets underneath of them. Okay? So like we saw with expenses, you've got supplies. You could have equipment expense, right? You could have land expense or building expense. You could have utilities. You could have a bank fee expense, right? Professional services expense. All of those are set to either cash or accounts payable, or if it's like a depreciation expense, you would offset it to accumulated depreciation, right? Because that's really not something that you pay. It's more of something that you accrue, right? So that's accumulated depreciation. You take that at the end of the year on your taxes. Okay? Does that make more sense, guys? Okay. Remember revenue, in order to increase it, you're going to credit it. Expense, in order to increase it, you're going to debit it. Okay? Making more sense now? Okay. All right, what other questions do you have? Ah, good point, Kevin. Great point. I did not realize that my screen wasn't showing at that time. Okay, so one of the things that we talked about in the beginning was the proper format for homework. Okay, I got a lot of improper formats. So let me just show you what I'm expecting in terms of format. All right, so let's see. Here you go. So for instance, this one going down the page, correct? So the P2 dash whatever 6A, right? Whatever the problem was. You're just going to keep on going down and working those problems and putting in, uh, you know, your different problems through the chapters. Okay? I want it all down one sheet. I do not want multiple sheets. This makes it extremely difficult for me to grade and to find things. If I have a hard time finding it and I can't find your work, in that one sheet, then I'm not going to give you credit for it because I don't want to have to search, okay, for your work. So make sure you're showing it in one sheet, going with the problems going down that sheet, okay? So if you have like some kind of a problem that you have to do like an income statement or a balance sheet or something on, put it in here, put it in a nice pretty little chart, do something like that, okay? Make sure that your work is neat and readable, okay? Again, if I can't find what you've done, then I can't give you credit for it. Does that make sense? Okay, Kevin asked, how do you want to see the T-bars? I see 2 line examples and also one big one. Okay, so the T-bars. So let's take a look at, or the T accounts. That's what we call them, right? So for instance, give me a minute, pull one up here. In just a minute. All right. So hopefully you've gone through and actually looked at the chapter 1 answers, right? Um, the T accounts that you should be doing, okay, should look something like this. So if you want to, you can expand your columns just by clicking and dragging, right? Delete this altogether. I just right-clicked and deleted that. So you can expand your columns here, okay? So the first 2, this is how you merge and center. You highlight, click and drag, and highlight and merge and center, right? So this one can say cash, right? And then you can underline, okay? And over here, you would put which one each one of these are. So for instance, in number 1, right, you would have 20,000. And then you've got over here 700, which is number 3. Okay, I'm actually taking this from problem E2-12B. Okay, so then this one is number 8. That's 9,400. Next one is 11,600. That's number 4. So for instance, you keep doing this on down till you get done with your cash. Okay, so this is the cash account. Okay, the next one is the accounts receivable account. All right, so you would merge these 2, center it, call it accounts receivable. Okay, and we're good on that. Then you just continue to fill in the numbers. Okay, office equipment is next. It really doesn't matter what order you have these in up here, as long as you're merging and centering and putting some format. So what I would do is E2-12B, right, and then I would put my here. You could put some underneath of it. Like you could have your legal database subscription. Right. Again, just underline. Same thing here. Accounts payable. Does this make sense? Right? So that's your T account. Okay, those are your T accounts. All right. Then you get down to the trial balance. So let's just take a look at that, what that looks like. Okay. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. Right. So here's your trial balance. Okay. So this is all a part of E2-12B. This would be perfectly fine to lay it out like this. Okay. So yeah, I understand. Believe me, I saw a lot of things, guys, on the homework, and it's like, yeah, I think you guys are making it too hard. So I'm not. It's not that I'm asking for a ridiculous amount of formatting or anything like that. It doesn't have to be super fancy. I'm just asking for it to be legible and neat and organized. Because in accounting, you have to be able to follow the entries, right? So when you do a journal entry, for instance, like this was, here was the journal entry that went with this. So if I just copy that here, here's what it copies and pastes like, which is terrible. I would move this here. I would make it very simple. Keep all of my debits in one column and all of my credits in another, right? So make sure I keep all of my descriptions in one column. Kind of makes sense what I'm doing here. So that's, how I would run it down the page. Then the next problem, so, oops. Let's say, let's say we just had P2-13A, okay, part B. So then I would say P2-13A, put in B. Sorry guys, allergies. And I would put that down under here. Right? Thank you, by the way. Somebody said bless you. Thank you. All right. So does that make more sense how I want to see this? I don't want all of these sheets because what happens then is I have to go through each and every sheet, give you feedback on each and every sheet, right? And instead, if you do it this way, I can just come over here to column L and format, put everything in red, and you'll see my comments and stuff very quickly and easily. Okay? So I am still working on some of the grading. So I will have that to you probably by the end of the evening, and you'll get feedback on that. The one thing I will tell you is that it's really up to you guys to go in and take a look at that answer key and compare what you've done and if you've done it correctly or not. Okay? So that's one reason that I make you guys do that rather than me giving you, a great deal of feedback, okay, on your work, because I want you to analyze it and see what you did wrong. Okay, this is very much an analytical class too. See how did I do this wrong? How did I come up with this number? It's part of your studying. Okay, it's part of what's going to make it easier for you to learn. If you go back and look at your mistakes and you learn from the mistakes that you made, I guarantee you it sticks better than if I tell you what you did wrong. Okay, because you have to go and figure it out. And I promise you, every one of these homework problems is in some way, shape, or form on the midterm and on the final. The midterm and the final are pretty much problems. Okay? So you have to know how to do them. So please, 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 please listen to me and go in and do the analysis of the homework solutions to what you turned in. I promise you, if you do that and you study in the ways that I'm telling you to, you will make an A in this class because you will know it inside and out and ask questions. Okay? All right. Any other questions tonight? No other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming on and getting on the webinar. I really appreciate it. I hope you'll continue to do that. Again, it's very valuable to you, and it is valuable to me, too, so that I can see what you're having problems with or not understanding. So please don't hesitate to ask questions, okay? If you can't make it, email them to me in advance, and I'll address them. But keep in mind, I need at least a few participants in order to do the webinar and to do the recording. So thank you again for getting on, guys. And we will talk again next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Central. Let me know if you have any questions in between then, okay? Happy to answer them. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.